So a few days ago, I posted a video about Cleric DPS. And well, it turns out, after doing some more testing, many thanks to Professor Goofy for the rotation suggestions, and what we end up with is a pretty significant bump up in damage output, over 200,000. Now this is taking full advantage of the plus 25% divinity arms. Without them, what I'll show you here is impossible. These again come from Master Moondancer Trial or your Imperial Citadel dungeon with the ultraviolet versions. Ultimately, this rotation ends up very precise. Exactly this here. I'll break it down a little bit easier, and there you go. So you have the 10-second artifact call, and then you have outside of that. So the first part here is mainly to just get your divinity back. So if you're jumping from this last part up to the artifact call, you'll need some divinity. So before calling artifacts, which is here, you'll have to do this prep. However, if it's the first time in starting of the fight, you can use the conflagrates without the channel divinity and then just have the pips so you can jump to the next part. That will allow your first Daunting Light to guaranteed gain 600 bonus magnitude, and then you're full into the artifact call. And you'll notice you're using Flame Strike there. That recently actually got improved because it has the feat Burning Patch, which is now 540 magnitude times 6. So over 3000 magnitude potential with this. However, the main gain is that you can cast this at the beginning, just as we do here, before even casting your artifact, and then it's just some damage over time, giving you all of that 10 seconds to maximize the output of Forge Master's Flame and Daunting Light, which is what you do then. So once you've cast Prophecy, then your artifact, you're then doing 5 Forge Masters and 5 Dauntings. This is an increase as before, where you would only use 4 Forge Masters and 4 Dauntings. And then on top of that, you have the damage over time from Flame Strike, and of course you still throw in your mount and belt item. You do want to throw in your mount and belt item at this time specifically, because at that point you will have 7 stacks of perfect balance. So you'll have like 4 radiant shift and 3 burning shift, and that's 7% extra damage, which will increase your mount and belt item. The test that I will show you, I actually used it when Perfect Balance procs, because there is that bit of a time delay before it triggers where you don't really do anything, and it can be useful if you're on timing to just cast the mount and belt item during that like half second, unless you're not wasting time. But if you're quick enough, you can still cast them exactly in this order and make full advantage of this 10-second artifact call. So then outside of the artifact call, you're going to immediately jump to this, casting 1 Conflagrate, then doing your 3 Forge Masters and 3 Dauntings, then doing another Conflagrate, then your Prophecy, then 5 Forge Masters and 5 Dauntings, and then you're going to repeat all that again before jumping into the artifact call. So that's the exact rotation, and it requires this exact setup with, yes, Expanded Faith and the plus divinity arms, totaling at 1400 divinity. I'll go into suggestions of what I think the devs should do in order to remove the reliance on these arms, because I don't really think it's fair. You're basically getting over 200,000 DPS difference just by having this one gear piece with the item. It's a pretty big game changer for Arbiter there. You're going from like a mid damage dealer to one of the best there in single target, albeit with the requirement of this very strict rotation. Like, you screw up anything here and your DPS just goes down the drain. You have to play a few mechanics, your DPS is also down the drain. So it's very, very punishing as soon as you have to break up this rotation. You might end up having to skip using a prophecy in order to still be able to cast one during the artifact call. You might have to cut this short so that you're still at the right amount of stacks before going into the next artifact call, things like that. And it really punishes your damage on Arbiters. It's a pretty tricky class to play in that regard. But let's jump into the actual DPS test and I'll show you our performance. And we done nearly perfect. The actual score for that and the log will show after the test. So we start things off with everything prepped. We have our Mighty Chorus on 5 stacks. We have 2 Radiant and 2 Burning Judgment. And here we're using the daily, the prophecy, the artifact, and then here's the Forge Masters, the mount, and the more Forge Masters and Dauntings. And you have to alternate between them in order to get that perfect balance to trigger. And once you're at the 3-3 stacks, you then want to push over to 1-1, and then you're going prophecy and making sure your divinity is full and doing the rest of the rotation there. If you do get a sudden verdict before you need to, say, cast Conflagret in that specific rotation, you can just go and consume the judgment pips and then avoid casting Conflagret, as that will give you enough divinity then to not have to do so. You do need a build which is at about 35% recharge speed to do this. So all we really have is the Masterwork set on 15%. We have our Charisma bonus. We have a shirt with like 1.5%. We have the Enchantment to give recharge speed, the Mount Collar to give recharge speed, and also then the boon. And that's everything, and that's like 36% recharge speed. And that's enough then to cast a Prophecy of Doom for each of these rotations. You do need a Tactician's Precision. As you see, we do make use of that to cut the last few seconds off Prophecy before going into the next artifact call. But this rotation was near perfect, so I don't really think I could have done much better. The only issue here was that our very first Flame Strike was not a critical hit, and that just means all the damage over time of that power was also not a critical hit. And if that was a crit, like it normally would be on most of my tests, I usually make sure the daily power and the mount power are crits, then it would increase our DPS by a little bit, and we'll show you that. But again, here's going into the next artifact call. So daily, prophecy, artifact, Forge Master Daunting, Forge Master Daunting, mount power, Forge Masters Daunting, Forge Masters Daunting, Forge Masters Daunting. And that's 5 encounters of each in that artifact call, which you can't do that when you say use the angel daily power, because that takes up like more than a full second to cast. But I would be aware that burning patch, you only want to use that on bosses that are going to stand still for the artifact call. If you have a tank who can keep the boss in one position, then you're fine to use that daily power. But if you're in a fight where you might have to move, or the boss teleports, things like that in the new dungeon, there are a few of them, a few situations, then it might just be better off going with the angel daily power rather than the burning patch. Just that will give you a little bit more reliable damage. This patch, it's great. It allows you to do this full rotation here, getting again 5 and 5 of each encounters. There is a bit of randomness with Cleric with damage as well, and that's sudden verdict. Depending if you get it to proc or not, it can increase your damage here and there. But that's the log, and there we are. Again, you will note that Flame Strike was only 46% crit chance, so that's usually at 100%, and for all my other tests on any of the damage dealers, I've made sure the mount power and the daily power are at 100% crit chance. And I just did not want to go through the pain of trying to go for another perfect test, because everything else is pretty spot on. My timing there over the 3 minutes and 10 seconds was near perfect. And so if this was 100% crit chance on Flame Strike on all of the hits, then we'd gain like about 20,000 encounter DPS. You see that on, say, another test where it was 100% crit chance, it's like 126,000 encounter DPS. So if we just added that 20,000, we'd be at 1.6 million encounter DPS, just over that. No other class has it like this. You can be forgiven to cast an encounter power in a different order, but not here. Here you cast, say, Forge Masters before Daunting and rip. Your entire rotation is gone. It's screwed up and you don't get any good damage. So it's super punishing on Arbiter, but you can do well. There is no excuse for you to not do so unless you haven't put the time and practice in with it. It will also vary depending on the content, what you can do with your rotation. Can you do everything like this, or do you have to play mechanics and then adjust your rotation? This is what you would use on a target that's always standing still and you never have to play a mechanic. But also keep in mind, this is like near perfect timing with regards to artifact calls. You're having an artifact call exactly every 60 seconds. If you're in a group content and you do have to play mechanics, then in most cases you'll sometimes delay like 10-15 seconds, and you can be forgiven to do that. Like if you're a leader of a group and you play Arbiter, which I do highly recommend, you can always delay the artifact call to make sure you finish your rotation and you're set and ready to go to the artifact call. Like you have to be ready to go to the artifact call or your damage will just suffer an absolute ton. You need to be able to get all of these powers out. But again, good to see that Cleric DPS can perform well. If played right, you can definitely be competitive with the other damage dealers out there, near the top as well. Some of you did suggest that I check out, say, Break the Spirit instead of Prophecy of Doom, and nah, I tried for like a few rotations, and it's just a mess. Like, Break the Spirit gives Burning Judgment, and so does your Daunting Light, and you end up like trying to follow a rotation and then getting screwed over because your Break the Spirit has a weird cooldown that might not match with your exact rotation, and it just requires you to learn everything different again, and I just would not bother with it at all. You're going to lose so much damage using it, because you look, Prophecy of Doom is like over 20% of your damage. You do not want to give that up for an encounter power that is basically worth only one Daunting Light cast. It's that low magnitude that it's just not worth it at all. And yes, it can give a little bit of a damage buff, but that is not going to be worth giving up Prophecy of Doom, not even in party content in most cases. So moving on from there, I want to give some further suggestions that I would recommend that the devs do in order to improve just Arbiter's playability and to remove the reliance on these arms. Like, you have to have 1400 divinity in order to do this exact rotation. You cannot without. Thus, you lose a lot of damage. Like, the normal rotation without the arms, without Expanded Faith, is this right here. It's still decent, like nearly 1.4 million encounter DPS, but you're losing quite a bit just without them. So what I would have them do is basically go ahead and reduce Forge Master's Flame down to 200 divinity cost per cast, and that fixes it. You'll still need to run Expanded Faith, but not these arms. And I would recommend disabling these arms then for damage dealers. It's just creating that reliance. Having one arms piece that is going to basically boost your damage by over 15% is not really fair. It's also like a completely different rotation. You got to learn everything new as soon as you would get those. Whereas you could just be practicing that from the beginning when you play Cleric, if they had that extra divinity, or matching that with regards to the actual costs of the powers, like reducing the cost down to 200 matches that. You only need then 1050 divinity to do then this full rotation if Forge Master only costs 200. Other than that, I would still recommend, as before, change Perfect Balance, so when you go down you don't lose those Radiant Shift stacks, and they could very well just buff Prophecy of Doom to 50%. It would increase the DPS of Arbiter by, say, another 10%, possibly up to 1.8 million in counter DPS then. But I personally believe the payoff is worth it when you have to have such a strict rotation. Like, you should be able to be one of the best damage dealers when you actually have to try this hard to play. Like, if it's actually going to be rewarding, people will do it, and there'll still be players who can't do it, who don't have the time to spend to practice this, and then it's just not that great a performing class for them. So I don't think it's like all of a sudden everybody's going to be playing Arbiter just because it has the potential to be the best. It takes a lot of effort to actually do this well at all. Like, I spent hours and hours on many days practicing, having so many fails before actually getting that good result on that good test. But once again, many thanks to Pro Goofy for suggesting this. He's an Xbox player, very good Arbiter, and he recommended this set of rotation. I did adapt it a little bit just to what I was getting with my tests, and yeah, that's then the exact rotation we end up with, and it's possible to pull this all off, but again, on a dummy where you don't have mechanics to play. You will need to learn to adapt it a bit depending on the content. But ultimately, yeah, about 1.6 million in counter DPS is where the true endgame cleric's at right now. Not very fair that it loses a lot of damage without specific items, but nonetheless, it has that potential. Thanks for watching. A special thank you to all these channel members, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.